I currently have mounds of snow outside my window, and that can only mean one thing. It's time to do a very cozy winter TBR. These are all of the books on my personal winter TBR, broken down by genre, and at the end, I'll also share some of my winter book recommendations. Starting off with some romance, first we have You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle. This book follows Naomi and Nicholas, who are fiancés, and about 3 months out from the wedding, they just start getting miserable and sick of each other, and it's kind of an enemies to lovers situation, but they're engaged. And so this starts this whole all-out war of pranks and sabotage and all of these things because whoever backs out of the wedding first has to pay the wedding bill. So they both, I think, kind of know that they both don't necessarily want to go through with this wedding, but they don't want to be the one to back out. So they're trying to trick the other one into backing out. And I just love a story where they're already together and they are fighting to stay together, or in this case, they're just fighting, but I assume it will eventually be to stay together. And I don't know what about this screams winter to me. I just feel like this isn't a super summery book. I think maybe it's the coloring of the book too, but I feel like this will be perfect to snuggle up with in the winter months. Also, I believe this book is low spice, but I believe it does have some spice. Then we have The Golden Goal by Anna Conwell. This is the first book in her More Than a Game series, which all of those books are on Kindle Unlimited. This is a hockey romance between Sutton and Shaw, and Sutton becomes the physical therapist, I think, for Shaw's hockey team. And I believe this is a rivals to lovers, brother's best friend kind of situation. This whole series and all of Anna Conwell's books are also Closed Door, No Spice. And I feel like this will just be such a fun hockey romance for the wintertime. Also, Closed Door and on Kindle Unlimited, we have Rosie and the Beast Next Door by Kaylee Baldwin. This follows Rosie, who agrees to help Dylan improve his public image if in turn he will help her catch the eye of this bookstore owner she is in love with from afar. And on the back of this book, it says it's for fans who love Jane Austen, forced proximity, fake dating, banter, hockey, happily ever after. So many things that I feel like you and I both love. So I am very excited to read this one. This one is part of a series, but the first book is not hockey related, which is why I didn't include it on my winter TBR, but I just wanted to note that in case you're somebody who likes to read the books in order. Then we also have the Appy series on Kindle Unlimited, which is a 5-book hockey romance series that is Closed Door, No Spice. So the first one is called Just Don't Fall, and this is the only one that I've read so far, but I loved it. I could already really see the found family developing and see some of the other male main characters that are going to have their own books, I assume, in the future, and I am so excited to see how their stories kind of play out. And if you are looking for more romances to read this winter, specifically no spice hockey romances, I just posted a whole video of these and a bunch more, so I would love it if you would go check that out when you're done with this video as well. Moving into a couple of fiction books on my winter TBR. First, we have the entire Beartown trilogy by Fredrik Backman, which is Beartown, Us Against You, and The Winners. And this trilogy follows a junior ice hockey team in this small town who has the opportunity to compete in the national semifinals, and the future of their town kind of rests on these young teenage boys' shoulders. And if you've read anything by Fredrik Backman, I always say it's about a hockey team, and it's also not about a hockey team because he puts in so much more deeper meanings, themes, social commentary, all of those things. And so I cannot wait to read this and see how that unfolds in this story as well. I'll read a quick quote that somebody wrote about Beartown to kind of hopefully get you inspired to read this book. It says, Beartown explores the hopes that bring a small community together, the secrets that tear it apart, and the courage it takes for an individual to go against the grain. In this story of a small forest town, Fredrik Backman has found the entire world. And if that doesn't make you want to read the book, I don't know that anything I say will. So this is definitely on my winter TBR. I hope to read this entire trilogy this season. Also by Fredrik Backman, we have A Man Called Ove. This follows the story of a seemingly bitter, kind of cranky older man named Ove, who of course has a deeper story to tell. And when this younger couple with a young daughter move in next door to him, I think we all kind of get a chance to hear that story. And I've just heard so many good things about this book. I feel like it's perfect and cozy for the winter time, and I need to finally read it. So it's definitely on my winter TBR. And then lastly for fiction, we have The Storied Life of AJ Fickery by Gabrielle Zevin. This is about a man named AJ who lives on this island, kind of isolated by himself. He owns this bookstore, and one day his prized possession, this rare collection of Poe poems, goes missing. And so this kind of forces him to further isolate. He's just struggling until one day this mysterious package shows up at his front door and changes everything. And I love that that kind of leaves a lot of room for mystery and other characters to get involved. And I've heard, again, so many good things about this story. I feel like it's perfect to read in the winter time. And I read a quote that this book just explores why we read and why we love. And that sounds like a perfect book. Now we have a handful of historical fiction on my winter TBR, which I feel like historical fiction and winter just go hand in hand for me. So first we have The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. I feel like everybody has read this book, so I don't feel like I have to explain what it is, but it follows two sisters living in France during World War II. And this has been on my TBR for forever, and I'm ready to finally get to it this winter and probably cry, because it seems like that's what everyone does when they finish this book. Then I also really want to read The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. I read The Rose Code in 2023, I believe it was, and loved that book. And this is one of Kate Quinn's newer books that came out last year. This one is set in the 1950s in Washington, D.C. and follows, I believe, 5 women who live in this boarding house together, and they have dinner parties, and everything's kind of just fun, I think, until there's this shocking act of violence that forces them to kind of reckon with what is the truth and who is the real enemy, and kind of has them questioning themselves and each other. And I think this one will be really interesting too, because this isn't a time period I've read a ton about, so I'm really excited to kind of dive into this world and see what I learn. Finally, for historical fiction, we have Lovely War by Julie Berry. This is a young adult historical fiction set during, I believe, both World Wars I and II. And it's the story of 4 young lovers told by Aphrodite. And I think growing up reading Percy Jackson and stuff, the idea that one of the Greek gods and goddesses would be like narrating this story is already very intriguing to me. And it says that while she's retelling this story, she's seeking to kind of answer the question of why are love and war eternally drawn to each other. And I think that in a lot of ways, this book is reminding me of Divine Rivals, and that was one of my favorite books of 2024, so I have really high hopes for this one. I have 4 different fantasy series on my winter TBR, starting off with Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. So Assistant to the Villain is the first one, but then there's also Apprentice to the Villain and Accomplice to the Villain, which comes out this year. And I have been wanting to read this series for forever, and the first one is actually on Kindle Unlimited, so I feel like now is the perfect time to start. This book follows our female main character, Evie, who takes a job working as, shocker, the assistant to the villain. And during that time, she finds herself falling for her boss while also trying to figure out who's trying to take out her boss. And I've heard so many good things about this book. I've heard that it's just such a fun, funny, kind of humorous fantasy, and I feel like I will really enjoy it. I've also heard that this fantasy, while it does include romance, does not include spice, which I always appreciate. Then we also have the Dance of Thieves duology, which is Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This romantasy series follows Jace, who is the leader of this kind of outlaw dynasty after the passing of his father, the king, and also Cassie, who is this reformed kind of thief who is sent by her queen to do some investigating in Jace's territory. And I don't know exactly what that means or what the plot of this duology kind of looks like, but I read Powerless last year, I read Divine Rivals, I read Six of Crows, and I really have just dipped my toe into fantasy and romantasy, and I'm ready to read more. Next, we have a series that I really want to reread before I read the next few books, and that is the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. This is a young adult fantasy series that follows Percy, who starts having weird things happen to him, and ultimately his mom sends him to Camp Half-Blood after telling him that his dad was a Greek god, and therefore he is half human, half god, which is a demigod. And I read this original 5 books in the series back in probably middle school, but recently he's released 2 new books in the series, and I believe there will also be 1 more. And I really want to just reread the entire series before reading the new books. The 2 new books specifically follow Percy as he is now a senior in high school, I believe, and is applying to get into New Rome University. And in order to get the recommendation letters he needs for this college, he has to complete 3 quests. I think wintertime is the perfect time to read this series or reread it, and I cannot wait to just get back into this story, feel all the nostalgia for my childhood reading, and see what new adventures Percy's up to. And lastly, for fantasy, we have the Prison Healer trilogy by Lynette Noni. So The Prison Healer, The Gilded Cage, and The Blood Trader, I believe. And the first one, The Prison Healer, is on Kindle Unlimited. This trilogy follows Kiva, who works as a prison healer, but then the rebel queen is captured, and she's tasked with keeping this queen alive long enough for her to go through these trials that are reserved for the most dangerous criminals. And then Kiva gets this letter from her family saying, don't let the queen die. So Kiva ends up going through these trials in the place of the queen, and if she succeeds, they both get their freedom, but no one has ever succeeded. I believe this trilogy also has a side plot of romance, but I don't believe there's any spice because this is YA. And then I have 1 dystopian series on my winter TBR, and that is the Shatter Me series by Tahera Mafi. This is, I believe, 6 books with some novellas sprinkled in, and the first book is on Kindle Unlimited. This series follows the story of Juliet, who has a lethal touch. And so the reestablishment, which I think is kind of like the government in this society, throws her in jail until they realize that she could be their weapon. But the problem is she doesn't know if she wants to be. And I've heard so many good things about this series. I know so many people read it years and years ago, but I'm ready to finally catch up, especially since there's a new book starting a new series set like 10 years after the end of this one coming out in 2025. Speaking of new releases, I have a whole video of 2025 new releases and also 2025 closed door new releases, so I would love if you would check those out if you're interested. Ending off with a couple of winter book recommendations. First, I have Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. These were some of my favorite books of 2024, and I feel like they are perfect for the wintertime because of the atmosphere where they live and just the magicalness of the letter writing and everything. They're very cozy for this time of year. These books follow Roman and Iris, who are rival journalists at a newspaper in their city, and their world is also at war. And Iris's brother is fighting on the front lines in this war, and she's been writing letters to him and sliding them under her wardrobe, and they disappear. So she doesn't really know where they're going, but she's hoping they're getting to her brother when they're actually going to Roman, her rival. I love this book. I laughed, I cried, I could not stop thinking about this book and still think about these books, so I highly, highly recommend them. For a fiction recommendation, I have The Great Alone by Kristin Hanna. This book is set in Alaska in the 1970s, and it follows a man who fought in the Vietnam War. He was a former prisoner of war, and he comes home and decides to move his family, his wife and his teenage daughter Lenny, to Alaska to live off the grid. So you follow their family making this move to this small town, meeting the townspeople, preparing for winter in all of these different ways, and then watching winter kind of set in and seeing how the darkness impacts them both externally and internally in their home, in their family, in each individual person. And I personally read this book last winter and could not put it down. Her storytelling is so good. It definitely does have some trigger warnings, so you might want to check that, but the story was so beautifully written. The scenery is beautiful, and I just loved learning about what it takes to live in Alaska and how tough the people are up there. And finally, for a closed door, no spice romance recommendation, I have Sweetbriar Cottage by Denise Hunter. This book follows Noah, who one day gets this letter from the IRS and realizes that him and his ex-wife Josie's divorce was never finalized. So they sort this out. She is driving up to his horse ranch to deliver this final piece of paper to kind of complete the process, and she ends up getting snowed in up there at this cabin with Noah. So this is a second chance romance where they're snowed in together in this epic storm, and they're forced to kind of confront their past and also figure out what they want for the future. And it's just such a beautiful love story and also a perfect atmosphere for this time of year. Okay, and that is my winter TBR plus some winter book recommendations. I would love it if you would comment down below what books are on your winter TBR this season. And again, if you're interested in some more closed door, no spice hockey romances to put on your winter TBR, I will link that video here for you to watch. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, friends.